there are complaints about major issues in Russia's armed forces. It turned out that in January, the Ukrainian Defense Forces carried out a series of strikes on the Kapustin Yar training ground in Russia, from which the occupiers were launching Oreshnik missiles at Ukraine. In addition, starting today, Russians will no longer be able to use the internet from Starlink. And Russian war correspondents are already complaining that they have to lay fiber optic cables right up to the front lines so that there is proper communication between the commanders and the Russian cannon fodder. And for launching drones, the lack of Starlink internet is a critical issue. And against this backdrop, Elon Musk made an important statement to Ukrainians today. At the same time, the Washington Post reports that Russian officials and business leaders are concerned that Moscow is losing time to reach a peace agreement before the country's economy and economic situation worsen. Any European ban on maritime transportation of Russian oil and the interception of shadow fleet tankers are serious threats to Russia, and this is exactly what Europe is doing right now. And finally, Ukrainian intelligence has reported that young people are rapidly disappearing in Russia and the demographic situation is catastrophic. We will cover all these topics in this episode. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave any comment under this episode, and subscribe to my Telegram channel Pechi News. The link is in this video's description and at the episode's end. If you find it interesting and useful, I ask you to support the work of this YouTube channel with your donation or subscription through the links and details in the description of this video. I would be grateful for any support from you, so I'll start with the key news in January. The Defense Forces of Ukraine carried out a series of strikes on the Kapustin Yar training ground in the territory of the Russian Federation, from which the occupiers were launching Oreshnik missiles at Ukraine. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported this. Here is their quote. During January 2026, the Defense Forces of Ukraine carried out a series of successful strikes on a complex of hangar-type buildings where pre-launch preparations for medium-range intercontinental ballistic missiles take place at the Kapustin Yar training ground in the Astrakhan region of the Russian Federation. And according to the military, the series of strikes was carried out using long-range strike weapons produced in Ukraine, in particular using FP-5 Flamingo missiles. As noted by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, according to available information, some of the buildings on the training ground were damaged to varying degrees. One of the hangars was significantly damaged, and part of the personnel was evacuated from the area. But later, the command of the Special Operations Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine added that the insurgent movement Black Spark, operating on the territory of the Russian Federation, helped the Ukrainian military in striking the Kapustin Yar training ground. Reportedly, long-range drones also attacked the Kapustin Yar training ground infrastructure, in addition to Flamingo. Representatives of the insurgent movement Black Spark. They were engaged in reconnaissance, recording the reaction of the occupiers, that is, the Russians, to the strikes, tracking changes in logistics and command, and assessing the enemy's adaptation after being hit. Let me remind you that on the night of January 9, 2026, Russian troops struck the Lviv region with an Oreshnik medium-range ballistic missile. Russia first fired an Oreshnik at Ukraine on November 21, 2024. At that time, the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin called the launch a successful test. And now, the Ukrainian Defense Forces and Russian partisans have conducted their own strike tests at the Kapustin Yar range. By the way, speaking of partisans in Russia, it's worth mentioning another interesting incident. A beautiful video like this appeared online from Russia.
the video. You can check the account under Lyoka. It's right there. Damn.
So basically I call Inca.
You usually walk.
I'll go after him.
So what's in this video? As it turned out, in Tambov on February 4th, as a result of a train derailment, gasoline tanks were damaged, which led to a massive fire. And here is that very explosion. Because of the incident, train traffic was completely stopped, and the engineer was seriously injured. Was it the partisans? Well, who knows. Another disaster happened to the occupiers on Ukrainian soil. Russian war correspondents are complaining about the complete and total shutdown of Starlink systems at the front. Initially, Starlink was disabled for both the Russian and Ukrainian armed forces, but later only the Ukrainian systems were reactivated. The Russian systems remained off. This is explained by the fact that Starlink units that are whitelisted work on the territory of Ukraine, while the terminals of the Russian occupiers are already permanently blocked. And now, Ukraine's Defense Minister Mikhail Fyodorov said Starlink terminal verification continues and the first whitelisted batch is already operational. Next is his quote. Right now, the whitelists are updated once a day. If you have submitted your terminal for registration but it is not working yet, you should wait. This is a very large-scale process that takes time. At the same time, we are already working on making sure that the data is checked in real time. And regarding this matter, the founder of SPACEX, Elon Musk, urged Ukrainians to register their Starlink satellite internet terminals and once again posted a step-by-step guide on social network X on how to do this. Next is a quote from Musk. It is important to register your Starlink terminal if you are in Ukraine. So here it is. Reports say Russians at the front recently faced serious problems because Starlink terminals were blocked. Command and control of troops is difficult, and some assaults have stopped due to a lack of communication in Ukrainian forces. The problems only affected those units that did not promptly submit lists for private Starlink terminals, but the registration process is ongoing. So, Russian war correspondents are already shouting that the occupiers are actively trying to lay fiber optic cables to the front lines so that commanders have some kind of communication with the troops at the front. But this is a very expensive project, and fiber optic cables are fragile and easily damaged. But while they're doing this, the Russians are complaining that without American technology, they're just like blind moles. Propagandist Solovyov is already saying they should strike and destroy American satellites like Starlink. How is this possible? What is this? Elon Musk didn't let the Russians use his technology? He's questioning how that's possible? Really? It amuses me that now on social network X, right under that very post by Elon Musk where he writes, "Register your Starlinks if you are in Ukraine," people have rushed in. Russians are complaining about something, saying, how is this possible? This is discrimination, Elon Musk. Are you making money off the war? And so on. So just imagine this. Russians, these unwashed people, are using someone else's technology to kill people in the country they attacked. And when this technology is taken away from them, they say, how can this be? What's going on? So I won't go any further, I'll just remind you how it all started. On January 23, it was reported that Russian troops are increasingly using drones with Starlink, trying to bypass the Ukrainian air defense system. Ukraine's defense minister Fedorov promptly reached out to Elon Musk. A solution was found, creating a whitelist of users in Ukraine, all terminals that are not included in these lists. And obviously, the Russians can't do this. They simply stopped working. But the catastrophe in Russia isn't just about that. For example, the Washington Post writes today that Europe wants to ban services necessary for transporting Russian oil. Russian officials and business leaders are afraid that Moscow is losing time to reach a peace agreement before the economic situation in the country gets worse. Any European ban on the maritime transportation of Russian oil and the interception of shadow fleet tankers are serious threats to Russia. The Washington Post article points out that all these restrictions have already been included in the new package of European Union sanctions. Additionally, as early as last week, 14 European countries such as the United Kingdom, France, and the Scandinavian countries. The Baltic countries warned that they might intercept and seize the Russian shadow fleet that violates international maritime law. I'll quote the Washington Post. Russia's oil revenues fell by 50% in January compared to the same month of the previous year, after tough new sanctions imposed by the United States Treasury Department against Russian oil giants Rosneft and Lukoil. In October, these restrictions forced Moscow to agree to ever larger discounts on its oil, more than $20 per barrel. Combined with India's agreement to stop purchasing Russian oil in favor of increasing imports from the United States and possibly Venezuela, these measures threaten to further strain the resources Moscow needs to fuel its war machine, risking a crisis as defaults increase throughout the economy. If European measures are implemented, they will affect half of Russia's oil exports, or about 3.5 million barrels a day which pass through the Black and Baltic Seas. Russian oil exports are very sensitive to shipping disruptions. This is the Achilles heel. And finally, I'll add some news that made me happy and amused me. By 2040, Russia risks turning into a society of elderly women due to the rapid aging of the population, gender imbalance, and demographic losses from the war. The Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service reported this, noting Russia's demographic situation is worsening rapidly. For example, the share of the population under the age of 35 has decreased from 55% in 1990 to 40% in 2025. And if this trend continues, by 2040 young people will make up only about 30% of the population in Russia. A particular concern is the sharp decline in the male population starting from the age of 25-30. Men either die or emigrate, which leads to a predominance of women in the older age groups. And according to experts' forecasts, by 2040 the median resident of Russia will be a woman aged 50-55. That Putin has outplayed everyone again. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. If you found this episode interesting or useful, you can support our YouTube channel with your donation or by subscribing or becoming a sponsor on YouTube. All links and details are in the video description. I appreciate your support. That's all for now. Take care and goodbye.